Ballot and Beyond, the Melvin Family, contributed by the Maryland Women's Heritage Center and written and read by Jean Thompson, an independent researcher and volunteer with the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. The library and archives at Goucher College were invaluable for this research. The women's suffrage movement is often depicted through an urban lens, documented by photos of marches and rallies filling city streets. For Marylanders, it is important to remember that the movement also spanned the Chesapeake Bay to include women of the agricultural Eastern Shore. Nannie V. Melvin, a journalist, social reformer, and political activist, is one of the Maryland women credited with planting suffrage club chapters on the Eastern Shore for the Just Government League. Founded in Baltimore by Edith Hooker in 1909, the Just Government League recognized early its need to broaden its base statewide, both to increase its political clout and use its voice on behalf of Maryland women. Its leaders strategically employed field secretaries, women who traveled state byways to organize events, canvass communities, engage the local media, call on local women's societies, and gather intelligence on support and opposition to women's enfranchisement. Nannie Melvin and her adult daughter, Delia Melvin, were hired among the early Baltimore field secretaries. Often working at their side as a volunteer was Nannie's second daughter, Mary Melvin, an ardent suffragist who joined the movement while she was a student at the Women's College in Baltimore, known today as Goucher College and now located in Towson. The activism of the Melvin women, and especially Nannie's efforts, helped the Just Government League grow across the Chesapeake Bay. Nannie was uniquely qualified for this job. She knew the waterways and backroads of the Eastern Shore. She was politically savvy. And as a journalist, she had connections at many of the state's newspapers, which she used to gain attention for her work and for the cause. Nannie was born in 1865 in Hillsborough, Caroline County, to the wealthy wheat farmer and two-term state senator Thomas Frederick Gary. As a young woman, Nannie achieved acclaim as a writer, with poems and essays published in the magazine Puck, in the Baltimore American, and her hometown paper, the Denton Journal. She married the Denton newspaper's owner, James Fisher Melvin, in 1883. They moved to Ellicott City, where he founded the Ellicott City Times, and one source identifies Nannie as the associate editor. In Ellicott City, they raised 2 daughters and 2 sons. But the Melvins split in 1905 when James moved to western states to launch more newspapers. Nannie became a working single mother and moved to Baltimore to support Mary, who was then studying at the Maryland School for the Blind. News reporters of the day closely followed Mary's academic achievement and frequently compared her to her contemporary, Helen Keller. By 1910, Nannie was an independent woman supporting 2 students at the Women's College. She told reporters that her daughter Mary Melvin's passion for the women's suffrage movement inspired her to go to work for the Just Government League. In a first-person article in the Baltimore Sun in December 1910, Nannie Melvin describes in detail a boat trip she made for suffrage work across the Chesapeake Bay. Remember, the Bay Bridge was not constructed or opened until 1952, so the crossing was by water transit. With the boat bucking against a snowstorm, She landed in Cambridge hours behind her schedule. Next came the ride up the Choptank River to Denton. Along the way, she polled fellow boat passengers about their views on women's suffrage, and she took notes and names. Town by town, she collected names of pro-suffrage sympathizers and antis. Antis, that's what suffrage called their opponents. She dined with women's clubs and delivered speeches and used family connections to gauge the climate for women's enfranchisement in Eastern Shore towns. She would repeat this journey over the water many times. And during breaks in the school calendar, it is evident that her daughters traveled as well. News articles from the Eastern Shore describe their involvement in campaigns. From 1910 through 1912, Nannie Melvin planted suffrage clubs in towns from Cambridge to Elkton. She told the Maryland Suffrage News about clubs she had organized in Cecil, Caroline, Dorchester, Wicomico, and other counties, including in Delaware. She also reported on the activity of the other suffrage organizations working on the shore. Nannie Melvin established an office for the Just Government League in Denton in September 1911. There, she provided a waiting room where farm women could gather to talk, whether they were interested in suffrage or not. In farm communities, she said, women often were isolated and needed connection. In October 1911, she founded the Just Government League for Caroline County. At Nannie's invitation, Anna H. Shaw, president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, spoke at Denton's courthouse in 1911. That year, Melvin led a delegation of Caroline County women to Baltimore to hear the British suffragist Emmeline Pankhurst speak at the Lyric. On Election Day in 1911, in a borrowed car festooned with signs, Nannie and other women rode 90 miles on Caroline County byways to give speeches and distribute suffrage leaflets. In February 1912, suffragists from the shore sent a deluge of telegrams to the state legislature in Annapolis. They called on the House Committee on Constitutional Amendments to report favorably on a women's suffrage bill proposed by the Just Government League. Nannie Melvin's telegram read, quote, "Eastern Shore women are ready and desire the ballot." When the proposed state constitutional amendment failed, Melvin's group then asked Caroline County voters to make a pledge: vote only for candidates who support women's suffrage during the next Maryland primary. Ever a trailblazer, Nannie moved on to a career as a policewoman, probation officer, and reformer of corrections programs for women. She died in Sacramento, California on May 14, 1942. And what became of her daughters? During and after her student years at the Women's College, Mary Melvin delivered open-air speeches for women's suffrage. She marched in the 1913 women's suffrage procession in Washington, D.C. When bystanders harassed the marchers, newspapers reported that Mary was present. Melvin was drawn into the United States Senate investigation of police security failures at the march. A witness claimed that the blind girl from Goucher was jostled by the crowd and harassed by hecklers. With her mother's help, Mary submitted testimony to the Senate panel. She furthered her training in occupational therapy and teaching at the Connecticut School for the Blind and San Jose State College. She became a noted teacher for the blind and for sight-impaired adults, and was hired by the Washington State Department of Social Security to make home visits in Spokane and Walla Walla. She died in Walla Walla, Washington in 1951, and her death was mourned by Goucher College alumni. And Delia Melvin organized many Baltimore suffrage events. She was involved in the Women's Suffrage Parade in Baltimore, which attracted thousands of suffragists to the city. It was organized for the Just Government League to coincide with the Democratic National Convention of 1912, which was held at the 5th Regiment Armory. In addition to her work behind the scenes, Delia donned the costume of Joan of Arc and rode a white horse in the parade. Delia believed in the importance of youth recreation and was for many years the director of the first public recreation center in Baltimore. She attended national conferences on recreation and spoke of the service to communities that centers provided, as well as their important role of bringing diverse people together for the betterment of the city. Later, like her mother, she was involved in policing reform and traveled widely to help enable her sister Mary's education and career. Delia died in Southern California in 1939. For the Melvins, the women's suffrage movement was a family affair. Their efforts helped the Just Government League on its way to becoming the largest organization advocating for women's suffrage in Maryland. By 1915, the organization boasted of a statewide membership of 17,000 people.